once the war was over, could, in fact, the corrupt, aristocratically dominated Constitution of England be peacefully reformed and brought, if not, nobody was arguing for democracy, but brought to a state where it more adequately represented the new Britain, the Britain of the tugboats, the Britain of the industrial world, the Leedses, the Manchesters, the Sheffields? Or would it remain in the hands of what was called, in the language of the parliamentary reformers, old corruption? Walter Fawkes had been to school at Westminster with one of the leaders of the movement for parliamentary reform, Francis Burdett. And when Burdett was arrested in 1810 under the draconian laws which forbade seditious writing and speech-making during wartime, sound familiar? Fawkes went to make an equally demonstrative come-and-get-me kind of speech in a tavern in London, was not arrested. But Turner was while Turner was not a sort of simple politician, and he had patrons who were right-wing as well as left-wing, there's no doubt that Turner participated in this life, really, that radical England, an old, half-forgotten England, not just the England of the ruined monasteries, that was the true England, the true Britain that would rise again. The most telling instance of this, and I'm going to come onto this painting in just a second, was the fact that Walter Fawkes had at home a collection of writings and armor and memorabilia from the First English Civil War, the English Civil War of the 17th century. Another Yorkshire gentleman who'd supported the parliamentary side was called Sir Thomas Fairfax. And a sort of illustrated history come catalogue called Fairfaxiana was produced by Fawkes, and Turner was asked to illustrate it. So Turner was invested in this notion of an almost lost free England that would somehow be reborn when the war was over. So this great, enormous war, the First Rater, is part of a famous story after the war in 1818, was done by Turner to show that free British art could, in some sense, be an analogy to free British political spirit. It was over breakfast one morning, we're told by Joseph Farrington, that Walter Fawkes asked Turner to see if he could do something if he could simply kind of conjure up something by lunchtime. And Turner said to the second son of Walter Fawkes, young Hawkey, let's see what we can do for Papa. And we have an absolutely wonderful description that the younger, if I can find it, of course, actually, the wonderful description, that the younger Fawkes described how this particular watercolor happened. Fawkes told us he began by pouring wet paint on paper until it was saturated. He tore, he scratched, he scrabbled in a kind of frenzy. The whole thing was chaos, but gradually, and as if by magic, the lovely ship came into being in all its exquisite minutiae. By luncheon time, the drawing was taken down and declared a triumph, as indeed it was. So Turner, in some sense, by doing, it's called a first rate of taking in stores, this extraordinary painting in just a few hours, wanted to show that versatility, inventiveness, bravery, freedom of form was in some sense sort of akin to what he wanted from the future of Britain. And I'll end in just a minute or so. He was torn at this period, at the end of the formative period of the war, between, on the one hand, yearning, a piece of him. I don't want you to think that he was really absolutely in his marrow a radical. A huge piece of him was well aware that he was the only famous artist in Britain who was not yet knighted, that he could never really get a commission from the crown. When he did get one, it was for another Battle of Trafalgar, which, as you can see, is so much less adventurous, so much less imaginative than the first one he'd done. And it was, to boot, a terrible failure. He hadn't noticed that King George IV's younger brother was himself a sailor and said, "I think you've got the rigging wrong." You know, it was a disaster. And all the kind of images which are designed to ingratiate himself with the monarchy were failures. The other half of Turner, however, was absolutely someone consumed by an obsession with somehow painting the historical truth. Here's the Field of Waterloo, also in the show. It is in the show, isn't it? It was in Washington, yeah. Extraordinary painting that was, again, hugely darkened with age. It's also very kind of problematic painting formally, was put away, wasn't brought out until the 1980s in the Turner section of the Tate Museum. But, you know, other than Goya, represents the most astonishing version of how you represent war. Again, just like Trafalgar, Turner had been to the battle site. He'd gone on a trip to see the Field of Waterloo in 1817. He'd taken extensive notes. But the notes are very interesting, and they say, here at Hougoumont was the carnage. Here the blood of so many soldiers was spilled. Here the dragoons went down. So he took an immense chance in this quest of his to make a kind of history painting by painting not the thick of the battle, and there were countless paintings at the time of the Duke of Wellington seated on his high horse, of the valiant British squares in their dazzling scarlet resisting the last charge of the Imperial Guard. All those were painted over and over again. What Turner does instead is to paint the aftermath, is to paint the wives, the lovers, the orphan children, searching in the gloomily lit their rockets going up at the back of Hougoumont. Again, here's the oh, damn it, sorry. Help. There we are, thank you very much. Holding the wrong thing. There's Hougoumont. So again, he's combining different elements from a battle. A battle is over, but this is the exploding chateau of Hougoumont as it would have been seen during the battle itself. The flares are fitfully going up over the field. This axial light, Turner used over and over again as the light of nemesis as well as the light of inspiration, providing just enough light for figures to actually desperately search among this huge, endless carpet of bodies that stretches far as the eye can see over the field. This, again, of course, did not go down tremendously well with the powers that be, or even with the public.